Audi's electric flagship SUV, the Q8 E-tron, has just landed in Australia in newly facelifted form. It arrives with fresh styling, a larger battery for quicker charging and longer range, and it even comes with a new name. You see, prior to the facelift, it was simply called E-tron. It arrived in October 2020, and it was Audi's first foray into electric cars in Australia. However, the problem with calling it just E-tron is that Audi had already used that moniker on things such as an R8 rear drive supercar and an A3 plug-in hybrid. Now though, Audi has stuck the Q8 prefix to the e-tron name for a bit of extra clarity, and it arrives in Australia in high-spec 55 trim in a choice of wagon or Sportback coupe styles. 3 versions are available, all packing dual motors with carryover 300 kilowatts and 664 newton meters of combined output. Each version gets a battery update to a huge 114 kilowatt hour gross, that's 106 kilowatt hour usable, and each comes with the same performance claim of 5.6 seconds for the 0 to 100 km/h sprint, in so-called boost mode. That's pretty quick for a non-performance SUV, however Audi will reboot its 3-motor SQ8 sometime in the middle of next year. For now, the Q8 E-tron range kicks off with a base 55 wagon that sits on 20-inch wheels with regular air suspension and features regular Q8 body styling and leatherette interior trim. This more luxury-focused 55 starts from $153,900 before on-roads and options, or around $9,000 up on the E-tron launched back in 2020. For those who want something a little bit fancier, they can opt for this, which is the Launch Edition, which goes for $165,900 and will be available for around the first 6 months of release. It gets larger and wider 21-inch wheels, S-line styling on the outside with black highlights, its own specific seats, and quilted leather trim. And lastly, the coupe-like Sportback gets 21-inch wheels, S-line styling, regular sports seats for the same $165,900 ask as the Launch Edition. Of course, they're base prices, so if you want a nicer Q8, you're going to have to loosen the purse strings a little bit further. Chasing cars. Honest reviews of your next car.
Brought to you by
a 22 kilowatt onboard AC charger, matrix LED headlights, and those opinion polarizing digital side mirrors all cost extra. And even premium paintwork and privacy glass are an extra sting. But one option that should be popular with buyers is the $1,600 22-inch wheel upgrade, which brings with it a lowered sport version of the adaptive air suspension. But that's only available on the Launch Edition and the Sportback. The facelifted Q8 E-tron debuts a fresher look front and rear, and it also brings Audi's new corporate badging. However, Audi says that the biggest improvements that have been made on the outside is with aerodynamics. There's also a new self-sealing system around the grille to go with the existing electric shutters, plus a host of underbody spoilers to help regulate airflow better. For those keeping score, the drag coefficient is down from 0.28 to 0.27 for the Wagon, and from 0.26 to 0.24 for the slipperier Sportback. Of course, the big news is that Audi has managed to up the battery size from the old 95 kilowatt hour to 114 kilowatt hour gross, or 106 kilowatt hour usable. And they've managed to do it without making the battery any larger. When Audi first released details of the 55 E-tron a year ago, it claimed the Wagon and Sportback offered up to 582 kilometers and 600 kilometers of WLTP range respectively. A year later, that WLTP maximum claim has dwindled to just 454 kilometers for all versions. At 25.6 kilowatt hours per 100, consumption isn't exactly stellar either, though we're going to put that figure to the test a little bit later. Charging? On peak 170 kilowatt DC fast charging, Audi reckons a 10 to 80% charge will take around 31 minutes. Audi's long been on top of its game when it comes to cabin execution, particularly when it comes to flagship models like this. There's certainly nothing broken about the old E-tron, and unsurprisingly nothing fixed when it comes to this facelift. However, this Launch Edition does get a couple of different features compared to the other 2 variants, starting with the seats. They're a specific S-line sport design that are leather trimmed and has this really nice diamond stitching. Each of the variants get the 12.3-inch digital display. The media system is the typical MMI Navigation Plus with a big 10.1-inch touchscreen on top, which gets all the fun stuff. Sat under that is an 8.6-inch touchscreen that primarily functions for climate control. Sat under that is some physical buttons for controls for some of the other car systems, and it also includes probably the world's strangest transmission controller. The MMI Fun includes a 3-year subscription to Connected Plus services, so Google services, parking and weather advice. And you also get everyday speech interaction for infotainment features. Meanwhile, a 360 camera and head-up display are standard. Dislikes? Well, virtual mirrors do make a comeback in this car. However, they are a $3,500 option, and thankfully they're not fitted to this particular example. Other options include a glass roof for $3,400, rear privacy glass for $1,050, and Bang & Olufsen 16-speaker sound for $1,750. So the moral of that is that if you really want a particularly nice Q8 E-tron, you're going to have to start spending big. Right, so far so familiar here. Let's check out row 2. In the back, it's reasonably roomy with decent knee room, generous headroom, and a bit of a 2+2 format in here, so it's comfortable in the outboard positions. In terms of conveniences, you get rear air vents, a little cubby for your phone, and a couple of USB-C ports, as well as a 12-volt outlet. You also get some nice bright rear lighting. You also get a fold-down armrest with a couple of hidden cup holders. Right, let's check out the boot. If you do choose the Wagon, you get 569 litres of boot space. However, if you do opt for the Sportback, that does reduce to 528 litres of volume. Under the floor, there's a bit of a cubby where you can store your charging cables, and you do get an inflated spare wheel. Right, let's take it for a drive. Out on the road, particularly on the open road, consumption can sail well north of 30 kilowatt hours per 100. And it does take a light cruise around town to get anywhere near Audi's circa 26 kilowatt hour claim. So it might be pretty thirsty, but it is actually incredibly drivable. As you would expect, electric thrust is fulsome and instant, but it is also quite pliable under throttle, making for quite a drivable experience around town. You do get 6 different drive modes available if you do include the configurable individual. But for the most part, comfort really strikes the best all-round balance. In comfort, the throttle response is nice and pliable, but when you do bury the throttle, the thrust is instant. Again, peak advertised range is 454 kilometers, which is well short of what Audi was originally claiming, which was around 600. Chasing Cars reached out to Audi Australia in regards to the range discrepancy between Germany's initial claims for the Q8 E-tron 55 at its international debut and the reduced peak range estimates of the Australian homologated lineup. The official response is on the screen before you. In short, Audi Australia assures that local vehicles are not downgraded, but that peak range is simply calculated differently. Now, we really need to get this car into the Chasing Cars garage to get an honest range assessment. But from the kickoff, the computer is telling me that there's around 450 k's of range. Again, power and torque is unchanged from the pre-facelifted version, although this time around you do get 3 different stages of brake regeneration, including finally a fairly aggressive 1-pedal mode. And that was one thing that was really missing from the last e-tron. In terms of comfort, the air suspension tuning is really nicely judged. When you do dial up dynamic, there is plenty of body control, although you wouldn't call this exactly the sharpest handler on the block. Not a lot new there, although Audi has fiddled a bit with the steering. The rack is quicker, and they've revised some of the other hardware to make it a bit sharper and pointier in the front end. Do the steering mods make a difference? Well, probably by shades, but when you're dealing with 2.6 tons of inertia, it really is a nice car to drive, and it's a flexible car to drive. And although it's not positioned as a performance car, there is certainly plenty of stonk on tap. And given this Q8 E-tron is essentially a facelift, of course it still maintains the ICE-based MLB Evo platform. And frankly, it doesn't drive all that much different from the old version. So while you might not be buying into the Q8 E-tron for a performance experience, once you do sink the boot in and find some corners, you might be well surprised. The suspension does adjust its ride height by up to 76 millimeters, depending on drive mode and conditions. And what you do have to be careful on a country road is diving too hard into corners, because the front end can wash out if you push on a bit too hard. The brakes feel solid and dependable, although they can feel a little bit wooden at low speed. What the MLB Evo platform does bring is a fairly conventional sense to the driving experience. It doesn't really feel like it has EV underpinnings. That will change in electric Audi SUVs when the Q4 E-tron arrives with a dedicated electric platform. All in all, the Q8 E-tron is an easy car to drive and an easy car to like. It's certainly cushy enough and absolutely quiet enough, so its role as a family car is well served. And all in all, the driving experience is very good, although it hasn't really improved the game that much or that noticeably over the last e-tron. And probably the biggest disappointment is that this car doesn't arrive with what was originally claimed as a 600 kilometer range. Probably the one thing to consider about this particular launch edition is that for your extra splurge, you definitely get sportier looks, but you don't necessarily get a sportier drive or more performance. Ownership wise, Audi sweetens the deal with 6 years of ChargeFox fast charging as well as 6 years of complimentary servicing. The warranty is a typical 5 years of unlimited kilometre coverage, and the battery is covered for 8 years. Despite the name change from E-tron to Q8 E-tron, this really is a facelift in the classic sense of the term. In most ways, it's very similar to the old version, but like most of the motoring landscape, pricing has crept up quite a bit over the last 3 years. If you want a bit of sportiness, it will cost more, and the same goes for nicer features, some of which really should be standard fitment on this flagship model. Despite the fresh looks, the interior is largely the same as the old car, and the same goes for the running gear despite the larger battery, apart from a bit of spit and polish. Of course, charging is a little bit quicker and range is a little bit longer, although that should be expected as an evolutionary process, and particularly given that you're paying a bit extra money. All in all, the Q8 E-tron is a fine luxury electric SUV. Just don't expect any big changes outside of the name. That's what I think, but how about you? Put your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe while you're at it, and as always, thanks for watching Chasing Cars.